Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a trip back to the 1980s to explore the wild world of Wall Street.
Ah, the 80s. Big hair, shoulder pads, and even bigger egos.
Exactly. And nowhere were those egos bigger than in Salomon Brothers.
Salomon Brothers, the kings of Wall Street, they practically wrote the book on bond trading.
Speaking of books, our guide for this deep dive is The Iconic Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis.
A classic. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the culture of Wall Street, then and now.
Critics have called it a manic comic novel and a scathing indictment of Wall Street greed.
It's both, really. It's hilarious and horrifying at the same time.
So let's set the stage. What was Salomon Brothers and why were they so dominant in the 1980s?
Well, Salomon Brothers was an investment bank, but they weren't like the other big firms on Wall Street.
How so?
Most firms at the time were focused on stocks. Stocks were seen as the glamorous side of finance.
Right. The big names, the blue chips, the companies that everyone knew.
Exactly. But Salomon Brothers, they saw an opportunity in a different market. Bonds.
Bonds. That sounds kind of boring.
Well, back then, bonds were seen as this sleepy backwater, a place for conservative investors.
But Salomon Brothers saw something that everyone else missed.
They did. They realized that bonds were undervalued and misunderstood, and they had the expertise to exploit that.
So they were like pioneers venturing into uncharted territory.
Exactly. And there wasn't much readily available information on the bond market. It was like the Wild West.
So they could use their expertise to make a killing.
They could, and they did. They became masters of the bond market, developing new trading strategies and financial instruments.
And this all happened under the leadership of John Gutfreund, the firm's legendary CEO.
Gutfreund was a larger-than-life character. He was known for his tough, demanding style. Some even called him a tyrant.
But he was also brilliant. He had a vision for Salomon Brothers, and he wasn't afraid to take risks to achieve it.
Right. He instilled a culture of competition, of always striving to be the best, to make the most money.
And that culture was reflected in everything they did, from the way they traded to the way they treated their employees.
Especially their new recruits. The training program at Salomon Brothers was notoriously intense.
Intense in a good way or a bad way?
Oh, definitely in a bad way. Think of it as a boot camp for aspiring masters of the universe. They were bombarded with information, subjected to grueling tests.
They were constantly being evaluated, pressured to perform.
And if they didn't measure up, they were out. It was sink or swim.
I've heard stories about managing directors literally trading trainees like commodities.
Oh, it's true. They were pitted against each other, vying for the attention and approval of their superiors.
It sounds brutal.
It was. But it was also a reflection of the cutthroat culture of Wall Street at the time. And it was all fueled by the pursuit of money, the desire to make as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
Now, we can't talk about Liar's Poker without talking about the game itself. It wasn't just a way to pass the time on the trading floor, was it?
Not at all. It was a microcosm of Salomon Brothers culture. It was all about bluffing, deception, and reading your opponent.
So it mirrored the high-stakes world of bond trading.
Absolutely. In both the game and on the trading floor, you had to be able to think on your seat to anticipate your opponent's moves. And you had to have the guts to bet big.
I love the story Lewis tells about John Gutfreund challenging John Merriweather, the head of arbitrage, to a $1 million hand of Liar's Poker.
That story is classic. It perfectly captures the competitive spirit, the swagger, and the sheer audacity of Salomon Brothers.
And it shows you just how high the stakes were, both in the game and in the real world of finance.
And the game of Liar's Poker wasn't just played amongst colleagues. It was a way for Salomon Brothers to assert dominance, to intimidate their rivals, to show them who was in control.
It was a power move, plain and simple.
Exactly. And that's what Salomon Brothers was all about. Power, dominance, and making money. Lots of money.
But their success wouldn't last forever. Cracks began to appear in Salomon's armor, and their dominance started to crumble.
And one of those cracks was their failure to capitalize on the emerging junk bond market.
The junk bond market. That's where Michael Milken and Drexel Burnham made their fortune.
Right. Milken saw an opportunity in high-yield, high-risk debt, which was considered too risky by most traditional investors.
Yeah, but he turned it into a gold mine. He used junk bonds to finance corporate takeovers, and he made a lot of enemies along the way.
He did. But he also changed the face of finance, and Salomon Brothers missed out on the whole thing.
Why? Were they too stuck in their old ways of thinking?
Partly, they were focused on their existing business, on what they knew. They didn't see the potential of junk bonds.
It's a classic case of a company becoming too big, too successful, and losing their edge.
Exactly. And that would come back to haunt them.
So they're at the top of their game, they're making billions, but there are cracks starting to show. What happens next?
Well, as Salomon's dominance in the mortgage bond market grew, so did the competition.
Rivals like Drexel Burnham and Merrill Lynch wanted a piece of the pie.
And they weren't afraid to poach Salomon's talent, to lure away their best traders with promises of bigger bonuses and more freedom.
It's like they were training their own competition.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, Salomon was plagued by internal power struggles. There was a clash between the old guard, the guys who relied on instinct and gut feeling, and the new breed of MBAs who brought a more analytical approach to trading.
It was a generational divide. And on top of all that, they missed out on one of the biggest financial booms of the decade, junk bonds.
That's right. While Michael Milken and Drexel Burnham were revolutionizing finance by using high-yield, high-risk debt to fund corporate takeovers, Salomon was sitting on the sidelines.
They were so focused on protecting their existing business that they failed to see the potential of this new market.
And this would prove to be a costly mistake.
So they're missing out on junk bonds, their competitors are catching up, and they're fighting amongst themselves. It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And that disaster would arrive in the form of Ronald Perelman, a corporate raider who set his sights on taking over Salomon Brothers.
It was a David and Goliath battle, with Perelman, the self-made billionaire, taking on Salomon, the Wall Street giant.
And the stakes were incredibly high. But we'll have to save that story for part 2. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of liar's poker.
When we left off, Salomon Brothers was facing a hostile takeover from corporate raider Ron Perelman.
Talk about a high-pressure situation.
I can't imagine what it must have been like to work at Salomon during that time.
It's chaos. Everyone was worried about their jobs.
And Gutfreund, their fearless leader, how did he handle this threat?
He fought back. He wasn't going to let some outsider come in and dismantle the empire he had built.
So it was a battle of titans.
It was, and it went on for months. There were lawsuits, backroom deals, and a lot of bad blood.
What was the outcome?
In the end, Perelman backed down. But the fight took its toll on Salomon Brothers. Their reputation was tarnished.
And Gutfreund, his authority was weakened.
Exactly. The takeover attempt exposed vulnerabilities within the firm, both financially and culturally.
It seems like the seeds of their downfall were already sown.
They were. And even though they survived the Perelman threat, they never fully recovered.
But before we get into their decline, I want to go back to Michael Lewis and his experience at Salomon Brothers.
Right. He's our guide through this jungle of high finance.
He started as a trainee, a total outsider in this world of sharks. How did he even get his foot in the door?
It's a funny story, actually. He was rejected by most Wall Street firms after college.
Why? Wasn't he a bright guy?
He was, but he lacked commercial instincts, or so they said. They didn't think he had the killer instinct to make money on Wall Street.
That's ironic considering he ended up writing one of the most insightful books ever about Wall Street.
It is. Anyway, Lewis ended up working in London for a while,
Okay.
and one night he attended a dinner party with a friend.
A dinner party. How did that lead him to Salomon Brothers?
Pure luck, really. His friend's wife happened to be seated next to the wife of a Salomon Brothers managing director.
Ah, I see where this is going. Connections.
Exactly. And during the dinner, there was this awkward incident with an insurance salesman who made a condescending remark. Lewis's friend's wife let him have it. She completely shut him down.
She sounds like my kind of person.
She was a force to be reckoned with. And the Salomon managing director's wife was impressed.
Impressed by her boldness.
Yes, she saw something in her, a certain fire, a willingness to challenge the status quo.
So she recommended Lewis for the Salomon training program.
She did. And Lewis, despite his lack of commercial instincts, got accepted. He was in.
That's incredible. Sometimes it's all about who you know.
It is. And it's a reminder that Wall Street is as much about social connections as it is about financial acumen.
So Lewis finds himself in this intense training program, surrounded by all these ambitious cutthroat guys. How did he survive?
He was a keen observer. He learned by imitating the masters. Like the legendary Dash Riprock, a superstar bond salesman.
Dash Riprock. That sounds like a name from a comic book.
He was a real person, but he might as well have been a superhero. He had this incredible charisma and uncanny ability to close deals.
So Lewis studied him, tried to learn his secrets.
He did. And he also learned from other traders like Alexander, a brilliant but eccentric guy who saw opportunities where others saw chaos.
It sounds like Lewis had some amazing mentors, but he also had some moral dilemmas, right?
He did. He started to question the ethics of what he was doing, of how Salomon Brothers made money.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, there's this pivotal moment in the book where Lewis talks about selling a large amount of Olympia and York bonds to a client.
Olympia in York, the real estate company.
The very same. And Lewis knew that these bonds were a bad investment, but he sold them anyway.
Because he was under pressure to perform.
Yes, and because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't.
So he compromised his integrity for the sake of his career.
He did, and it left him feeling conflicted, disillusioned.
That's a tough situation to be in. To know that you're doing something wrong, but feeling powerless to stop it.
Exactly, and it's a dilemma that many people in finance face.
The pressure to succeed, to make money, can sometimes override ethical considerations.
It can, and that's one of the key takeaways from Liar's Poker. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed.
And it shows how the culture of Wall Street can corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals.
It can, but it also shows that individuals have the power to resist, to speak out, to challenge the system.
Like Michael Lewis did by writing this book.
Exactly. He could have stayed silent, could have continued to play the game. But he chose to expose the truth, to share his experience with the world.
And that's what makes Liar's Poker such a powerful and enduring book. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming pressure, individuals can make a difference.
And that sometimes the most important thing is to speak truth to power, even if it means risking everything.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Liar's Poker and Salomon Brothers, the kings of Wall Street in the 1980s.
We've explored their meteoric rise, their cutthroat culture, and the cracks that started to show in their seemingly impenetrable armor.
Right. We've talked about their missed opportunities like the junk bond boom and the internal power struggles that plagued them.
And of course, we can't forget about the hostile takeover attempt by Ron Perelman.
That was a close call. They managed to fend him off, but it definitely left them weakened.
It did. Their reputation was tarnished and their invincibility was shattered.
So what ultimately led to their downfall? Was it one big event or a series of missteps?
It was a combination of factors, really. The competition was heating up, and rivals like Drexel Burnham and Merrill Lynch were catching up fast.
They were poaching Salomon's top talent, luring them away with promises of bigger bonuses and more freedom.
Exactly. And Salomon was slow to adapt to the changing landscape of Wall Street. They were too focused on their existing business, on what had made them successful in the past.
They missed out on the junk bond revolution, and they were slow to embrace new technologies and trading strategies.
Right. They were stuck in their old ways of thinking, and that proved to be their undoing.
It's a classic case of a company becoming too big, too successful, and losing their edge.
It is. And it's a reminder that even the most powerful institutions are vulnerable to change.
So what happened to Salomon Brothers in the end?
They were eventually acquired by Travelers Group in 1997.
And Travelers Group later merged with Citicorp to become Citigroup, one of the largest financial institutions in the world.
Exactly. So, in a way, Salomon Brothers lives on, but it's a shadow of its former self.
It's a bit sad, really. They were such a dominant force on Wall Street for so long, but their story is also a cautionary tale.
It is. It's a reminder that no institution is too big to fail, and that success can be fleeting.
But beyond the specifics of Salomon Brothers' rise and fall, Liar's Poker offers some broader insights into the world of Wall Street.
Absolutely. It's a timeless story about ambition, greed, risk, and the seductive power of money.
And it raises important questions about the culture of Wall Street, about the ethics of finance, and about the role of government regulation.
Right. It's a book that everyone should read, whether they're interested in finance or not, because it tells us something about human nature, about our desire for wealth and status, and about the choices we make when the stakes are high.
And it's a reminder that even in a system as complex and powerful as Wall Street, individuals can make a difference.
Whether it's Michael Lewis exposing the truth about Salomon Brothers or a single trader making an ethical decision, each action has the potential to ripple outwards and create change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Liar's Poker, I'm left with a sense of both fascination and unease.
I understand. It's a story that captures the excitement and the danger of Wall Street, the allure of wealth, and the potential for corruption.
And it leaves us with some important questions to ponder. Has Wall Street really changed since the 1980s? Have we learned from the mistakes of the past? Or are we doomed to repeat them?
Those are questions that each of us must answer for ourselves. But one thing is clear. The world of finance is a powerful force, and it's up to us to ensure that it's used for good, not for greed.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into liar's poker. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit entertaining.
And we hope it sparked your curiosity to learn more about the world of finance and the impact it has on all of our lives.
Thanks for listening. Until next time, deep divers.